Welcome back to Balmer's Workshop. Thanks so much for joining me here once again. It is always great to have you back. This time we are going to finish up the build on this front bumper for the funny little vehicle whose name I can't pronounce. Pajero, I don't know. Anyway, we finished the last episode with pretty much what you see here on screen, the bumper all welded together and mounted back on the vehicle. This time we're going to add all the finishing touches and send it off for sandblasting, priming, and powder coating, and get it installed for the final time. Okay, so I've added the skid plate back on, and as you can see, it leaves me with a pretty decent gap there. That's about a 4-inch gap. If you're going to the bottom, or to the apex of this bend here, that's about a 4-inch gap. If you're looking at this, that's about a 2.5-inch gap. But basically, we've got a visible 4-inch gap to fill. So I think what I'm going to do is just make myself up a little fill plate that I will weld to the bottom of the bumper. That'll have some holes and slots in it to allow airflow and to look kind of cool, and just to fill that up. And the license plate, as I stated, will cover some of it as well. I've got a license plate mock-up right here that I'll put in place, and while I do, I'll show you. This is my Nissan Xterra rear bumper insert. What's sitting on top of it is a set of recovery points, and then also my hinge for the swing-away tire carrier. That's the back side of it, and that fits all years of Nissan Xterras. And there's another one that is finished. It doesn't have a spare tire carrier on it, but it does have a cutout for a trailer wiring plug. But yeah, I do stuff for Nissans as well. This one, because it doesn't have the spare tire carrier on it, has a cutout for the spare tire to fit in its stock location, and also a cutout for the exhaust. Whereas the one with the spare tire carrier doesn't have a cutout for the spare tire, of course, because it will be on the carrier. But they both come with receivers that, as you can see, are super reinforced, and they've got areas to clip up wiring and stuff like that. Yeah, good, strong, decent solution to getting a better departure angle on your Nissan Xterra, and a much stronger, much better looking bumper with recovery points as well. Anyway, I have added on top a Grille tube, which is much too tall for this application and not quite wide enough. What it is this is the one that I use for my Suzuki Sidekicks, one of the Grille tubes that I offer for my Suzuki Sidekick bumpers. And I just thought I'd use it as a very basic starting point for my dimensions on this one. So these are 70-degree bends. It's cut from a 48-inch piece of tube, and this section in here is 10 inches between the bends. So to me, it looks a little narrow in this area, and also narrow in this area. So I'm going to extend this from 10 inches to 12 inches. I'm going to stick with the 70 degrees. I think it looks good. And then we'll have obviously shorter legs, which will bring this guy down. The customer wants the bottom of the tube to be even with the top of this emblem. Sorry about the focus there. So we'll bring it down considerably, about 6 inches by the looks of things, maybe 5. And then these legs will be a little bit wider than they are now, hopefully, because of the 12-inch spread. I may go a little less than 70 degrees initially, just to ensure that I can get as wide as I want. I might go 60, and then we'll tweak them after that. Let's have a look at how it works out. Sometimes what I do when I'm working in the bender is, rather than go to a given number of degrees, 60 or 70 precisely, what I'll do is go to the end of one of these notches, and that might be 62 degrees or 63 or you know, some kind of an odd number like that. But at least that way I can record what hole position I was in on my die and what notch position I was in on my bar, and then I can replicate that bend exactly every time, rather than trying to go to a given number and then trying to replicate it as best I can, which I can do a very accurate job that way as well, but much easier to just choose a known position on the tooth bar. So I may end up doing that. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I cut myself a 48-inch piece of tube, and I marked a center point on it, and then I marked 6 inches out on either side of that center point for my 12-inch flat section, as opposed to a 10-inch flat section on this one, like I was saying. And I've marked the direction of my bend. So this bend will go in this direction, whereas this bend will go in this direction. That way, if I was to start my bend here and bend in this direction, of course I'm getting into this area that I didn't want to deform. So in order to keep that dimension true, I want to bend in this direction with this bend, and in this direction with this bend. It's critical. And obviously I have to reverse the tube to do that in the bender, so I had to mark both sides of the tube. So as you'll see, I've marked my direction of bend, and then if I roll the tube over, I have the same thing on both sides. So that way I can bend the tube in both directions and have my marks in proper orientation. So let's go ahead and do some approximately 60-degree bends as a start. So like I said, rather than go to a specific number of degrees, I went to a known point, which is notch 10, hole 1 on the die, which gave me, it looks like, almost 70 degrees. But once I allow for spring back, which just means releasing this mechanism, and I allow everything to relax, and I release that from the die, then pull it tight against the die, what we actually have is 65, maybe 65.5 degrees. So a little more than I actually wanted, but I think it'll be fine. We'll now place this on the bench and start making some marks for cutting this thing. If you saw me, or you did see me doing a really fancy dance over top of this whole thing each time, which probably looked pretty silly. But my reason being is there are powder coated sliders in here, and they're pretty big, and for me to move them on my own is challenging. And each time you move a big challenging object like this on your own, there's a chance of scratching. So I thought it'd be safer just to leave it in place, so that's why I did that. So now that I've got my tube bent, I'm just going to make a measurement from the top of the bumper to the top of the emblem, so that I know how high I need to make my tube, and that is pretty much exactly 7 inches. So we'll go over the bench and make some marks on the tube. So here's the tube that I've bent up. It is 12 inches from the start of the bend to the start of the bend, and the bends do go outwards from center as indicated earlier. Still has my center point. And now what I want to do is measure down that 7 inches that I need from the bottom of the tube to a simulated top of the bumper. And what I'm going to do to make sure that I have a nice accurate measurement from the bottom of the tube is use a backstop, which I'm just going to use a piece of scrap angle iron, and then I'm going to use a piece of flat bar to simulate the top of the bumper. So I'm just going to go as close to the bend as possible, move my flat bar up to 7 inches. We'll go over to the other side. Bang on 7 inches there. We'll double check this one. 7 inches exactly. So now it's just a simple matter of marking the tube. And when I go to put this in my saw, I'm going to need to flip it over, obviously, for one of the cuts. So I've got to mark both sides of the tube. So we'll just flip the tube and mark the other side. Okay, so now I've got marks on both sides. And I'm going to adjust my saw to the correct angle to make these cuts. And because 90 degrees minus the 65-degree bend equals 35 degrees, I need to set my saw at 35 degrees, and I will have the correct cut. tube is in place. Seems like a pretty good fit up to me. There's the top of the emblem, there's the bottom of the tube. Pretty much as wide as I wanted. Could have gone maybe a little bit wider, but I'm pretty happy with that. Sitting nice and even, and it is tilted forward several degrees. I'm going to guess that's about maybe 10 degrees or so, just to give it a little bit of a nice look. If it was sitting at 90 degrees straight up and down, then you know, I don't think it would look as nice. It's not quite as clean a look. So we went with the slightly leaned forward approach, and I think it has worked well. You can see that the footprints match up nice and even. All I had to do was grind about 1/4 of an inch out of the fronts of these cuts and trail that off to the back in order to get my lean that you see here. So very easy. You saw that on the time lapse. Simple thing to do if you want to do that. So now I'm going to run this by the customer to make sure he's happy with it. As I said, I have set it exactly so that the top of the emblem is at the bottom of the tube. However, this is such a low vehicle that when a person's standing looking at it, it's going to look more like that. So I just want to make sure he's happy with it. That's the main thing. If he wants it higher, I'll do a new one, and we'll keep this one in case it works for a different vehicle one day. Where were we? I think since the last clip I have added the shackle mount recovery points, as well as I have tack welded the grill tube in place, and I'm very happy with their position. I'm very happy with the way the bumper sits on the vehicle in terms of its lean angles. There's a better word for that. It's roll angles, and basically it's coming together very well, except I noticed a really crappy discrepancy. I'm very happy with the way this corner fits up. The bumper itself is overlapped by the front of the vehicle and the fender just slightly, and it looks really nice as far as I'm concerned. But if we come over to this side, it is not the same. You'll have to look fairly carefully, but the bumper protrudes out from the vehicle about 1/4 of an inch more in this area, and also about 1/4 of an inch more in this area. Not acceptable by my standards. I give myself about 1/16 of an inch of leeway as far as discrepancies like that go. So 1/4 inch is considerably too much for my liking. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to pull this bumper off and make some adjustments. So what I'm going to do, in case you ever come across this in your works, you'll know how to repair it. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to remove the grill tube as well as the shackle mounts. What I'm going to do is double check my angles, these angles here, and make sure they're absolutely consistent. They should be 19 degrees. I have checked them by putting my angle finder, my protractor, just above the shackle mount here, and they look like they are within 1/2 degree at least. Now 1/2 degree over, this is about, I forget, but I think it's about 13, 14 inches, something like that. Isn't a ton, but it is enough to make a noticeable difference. I don't think it'll be 1/4 inch though. So I'm a bit confused. I don't quite know where this discrepancy is coming from. I've made a ton of measurements along the vehicle. I don't think the vehicle is you know, I don't think the discrepancy is coming from the vehicle mounts or from any issue with the vehicle itself. So it must be from my bumper. So it's time to pull this thing back off the vehicle and do a little investigation, figure out where that issue is coming from, and correct it. What I'm going to do to correct it, most likely, I'm happy with this corner. I really like the way it looks. I'm not as happy with this one. So most likely what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a zip disc and I'm going to cut along my weld line all the way down the bottom and in the, all the way around the back and on the bottom as well, and leave the front face intact. And then that way I can physically tweak this out a little bit. Tweak it in, I should say, my mistake. Push this in a little bit and then brace it in place. The fact that I'm making that cut line with a zip disc, I would think might allow me to squeeze the bumper in just based on that, or I may have to make a second cut and just open that up a little bit to maybe, an 1/8 of an inch, something like that. And once I've got a wide enough gap, it will allow me to collapse that and bring the bumper into where I need it to be. So that's the way to do it, is cut the weld out completely, except for the front face of the bumper, and just add a little more angle onto it, brace it in place, tack weld it, double check everything, weld it up again, remove the bracing, put it back on the vehicle, hope for the best, and if it's good, then we will remount the shackle mounts, remount the grill tube, and get everything welded up. So after having removed the shackle mount recovery points so that I could get a better look at my angles here, what I discovered is that both this angle and that one are exactly 19.5 degrees. So they're both a 1/2 degree more than I was actually hoping for, but a 1/2 degree is not terrible. And it kind of furthers the mystery of why I have so much discrepancy there. I have found one further discrepancy, which is key. Let me grab the combo square. So if I measure from this point to the grill, or not the, well, basically the grill, and then I measure the same spot on this side, I have a 1/8 inch discrepancy. This side is 1/8 of an inch further out, which does contribute, of course, to that. My mounts are identical, I know that. So that discrepancy would be in the vehicle itself, but it still doesn't account for a full 1/4 inch at this point. So I am unhappy, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten up the angle on this bend, as I kind of thought to do earlier. I'm going to cut this and tighten it up just a little bit so that it looks good on the vehicle. Sometimes it's really difficult to figure out where your discrepancies are coming from, and sometimes it's best just to make your parts fit the vehicle rather than worry about total symmetry. It's going to look symmetrical on the vehicle, which is far more important than actually being symmetrical. What we're looking for is an overall perfect, good finished look rather than true symmetry. So that's what the customer is going to get. So I'm going to pull this thing off now, mark that cut line, cut it, and we'll pinch it into what I believe is the reasonable degree, give it a quick tack, and put it back on the vehicle to confirm everything. I have made the cut, and I also, before I did that, I marked the fender lines on the bumper itself. So this is the good side. This is what I'm hoping to achieve on the other side. The amount of coverage, and we can see a pretty clear difference on this side. So obviously we need to pull this in. I have made just a zip disc cut, so not a very thick cut at all. However, we can see that if I pull this in, I've actually got a considerable amount that I can move that. So I don't think I need to open that up anymore. I think it might be a mistake to open it up anymore. Basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to pinch that in almost to the degree that I can't go any further. I'm I'm going to tack weld it, and I'm going to put this back on the vehicle, and we'll double check it. I think, in fact, I'll tack weld it on the bottom. That way, if I'm not happy with it, I can cut it again with zip disc on the vehicle and adjust it and retack it on the vehicle. But I'm pretty sure that's going to give me just about what I need. All right, bumper has been cut and re-tacked together, as you saw me do on the bench. I have not taken any measurements whatsoever yet. All I have done is eyeball it, so you're joining me for the discovery of how this has turned out. I have redrawn a line on the bumper in its new position, and just judging by that, it looks a whole lot better. To me, that looks almost exactly like that. But let's do some quick measurements and find out. So I'm just loosening up the adjuster on my combo square and running it in to the closest tolerance there. And now I shall tighten that wheel up and move over to the other side. And we'll double check it. Here we go, moment of truth. So I am off by, I would say, about a 1/16 of an inch, which is what I will allow myself to accept. So in that regard, I'm happy. Now let's check at the line right there. All right, so there's our dimension. Tighten that up, move to the other side. And again, we're off. This time I'd say a little more than 1/8 of an inch. So I'm a little bit tighter on this side, the tiniest bit tighter. So I think it's reasonable probably to cut that tack and open this up just that littlest bit and re-tack it, especially because I did put a tack just on the bottom of the bumper here. Let me get you low enough that you can see it. Just one little tack there, so I'll cut that. We'll open it up, remeasure everything. I'll hold it in place, tack it again. And once I'm totally happy with it, I'll remove it from the vehicle, brace it, and weld it. All right, so I've made that cut, and I've brought the bumper into the correct angle as noted, and you can see that by the difference in the lines there. That's the amount that I moved, which is just about exactly what I wanted. There is a very tiny gap left here, which I want to expand to give myself some weld prep. So I will do that, and then I'm going to add a piece of brace to make sure that I don't have any more heat shrinkage, and then we'll go ahead and weld this thing up. So let's figure out if we've had any heat shrink from welding up this joint. I really hope we haven't, because I desperately want this to stay in position. I have let this cool to the point that it's literally cool, so we don't have any worries about it shrinking up after I cut it. Difficult to hold the tape in place here, but it looks perfect to me. I don't think we moved at all. So I'll just blend out my tacks, and we'll put it back on the vehicle and make sure that it actually fits exactly as I want. I was lucky in that I didn't have to remove my my Grille tube. Originally I thought I would in order to blend this out properly, but I was able to leave it in place, so at least I don't have to reposition that. So long as the bumper fits up nicely now, all I have to do is reposition and locate my recovery points on the front of the bumper, and then weld them up fully along with the Grille tube. And then all we have to do is add some holes to mount the license plate and add the little lower valance piece that I designed on the computer. Hooray, it fits. I am very satisfied with the fit up now. You can see that where the wings angle back towards the Grille is very, very even now. And let's double check our tolerances with my combo square. So, oops, hang on, that wasn't quite flat. It's hard to do the camera at the same time. There you go. And over to this side. And there you go. Absolutely identical. And that is the way I like it to be. So now I'm going to remove the bumper from the vehicle, put it back on the, or in the vise rather. I will add those recovery points back on, tack them in place. I'll mark my holes for my license plate mounts. We'll get all that stuff welded up solid, and then I will go and pick up my little valance plate, my lower fill plate that goes down below the bumper from my supplier. It's going to be ready in about an hour or two, and then we'll get that on, and this front bumper and front end will be absolutely finished as of today. Thank goodness. Alright, so now that we've got our shaft mount recovery points welded back in place, as well as our grill tube, I am ready to add the license plate and then also the lower valance that I created on the computer. And I have the lower valance, like I said, the supplier had it ready for me, which was very nice. And I'm going to bolt it in place just like so. So it will fill that, that area that would have been exposed, which is kind of ugly. Give it a nice look, and basically we've got airflow to the radiator from every available point. The license plate is going to hang down in this area, so it's really opened up as much as it reasonably can be. So I've given myself 5 holes to mount it by. I'm going to pull the bumper back off again now. I'll transfer these 5 holes onto the bottom of the bumper. I will punch mark them, I'll drill them out, tap them, and we'll attach this with some 1/4-inch stainless steel hardware. And at the same time I'll also drill and tap the holes for the license plate, and I will drill out a couple of drain holes near the corners for condensation to come out. When you drill a hole in a bumper, even when it's filled with a screw afterwards, you can be pretty much guaranteed that moisture is going to make its way inside via condensation. So the best bet is just to drain that water out again rather than trying to seal it all up. So whenever I've got holes in a bumper for mounting a license plate or a valance or a skid plate or whatever else to, I always also drill additional drain holes. A finished front end. So I'll give you a little sweep from one side to the other. You can see that our fender line matches up really well. We've got a 3/8 of an inch gap between the fender and the top of the bumper. All our lights are working properly. I have added the fill plate, or lower valance if you prefer to call it that. I've put a mock-up of a license plate in place so you can see how that will look. I might add some captive hardware to the front of that fill plate for the lower bolt holes of the license plate. It really doesn't need it, but it might look a little cleaner, so maybe I'll add those. I'm not quite sure yet. But we're fully welded, fully installed, and now all it needs is to go for sandblasting, fusion bonded rust resistant primer, and textured black powder coat. But there we go. I am happy with the front end. It's done. Dimensionally, it is awesome. Totally symmetrical. Fits the vehicle perfectly. And I'm really happy with it. Welcome to Balmer's Workshop. Thanks so much for joining me here once again. It is always nice to have you back. And look who else is back. The Pajero, or Pajero, or Pajero, or however you might like to pronounce it. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but I pronounce it Pajero. We've had this vehicle in a few months ago, and we did a video on the front bumper build for it, but we neglected to include the install at that point because, as you can see, it hasn't been installed yet. That bumper has been sitting around my shop for months and months while this vehicle was waiting for a lift kit that was coming from Russia. We'll talk about that lift kit a little bit later on. You can see some of the orange components underneath the vehicle now, which are parts of that lift kit. It's been lifted 2 inches. The customer has added some really nice tires and wheels to it, and there's a ton of stuff coming up in terms of the build that's going to happen here at Balmer Fab, or Balmer's Workshop as you know it. So stick with me, and we're going to now get this front bumper reinstalled. We'll talk about some of the issues that the lift has created with that, and we'll move on from there into creating a ton of new components for this thing. Let's start at the start with this little walk around. When this vehicle came into me in the beginning, it was for a custom front bumper, which you see here. We've modified it slightly since then by adding the lights to it and the high lift mount. But essentially, this was the first piece. So it's basically a really similar bumper to what I make for Suzuki Sidekicks, which are kind of my mainstay in this business. And it is a tube style bumper. So by tube style, of course, I mean it's basically built from rectangular and square tube, 2x5 and 2x2, respectively. I've done my best to match the shape of the bumper to the vehicle and make it look like it works really well with it. And I hope that you'll agree that I've done a decent job of that. The Grille tube worked out to be just the perfect height for this high lift jack to be mounted on there, where it sits just above the headlights and just below the hood line. So it gives a really nice clean look that the customer is happy with. Here's that lower valance that we rebuilt, and the reason for that was because the customer had a 2-inch lift installed, which we'll go over. Or maybe I have gone over it, depending on how I edited this. But anyway, when we did the valance originally, it was to fill, obviously, the gap between the bottom of the bumper and the skid plate, but that gap grew by 2 inches when the lift kit was put in. So we redesigned this valance piece. We changed some of the slots and stuff on it and made it look a little different. And the customer is very happy with the look so far in the pictures he's seen, and hopefully he's just as happy when he sees it in person. He's done a very nice job of doing some kind of rock guard style paint along the sides of the vehicle and all underneath and in the fender wells, and I'm guessing he will remove this valance and paint him behind there just the same way, and then that'll give a much cleaner look after he's done that. The valance is removable by 5 screws, so pretty straightforward there. And we have the stock skid plate, sandblasted, primed, and powder coated to match everything else. It's a really form-fitting skid plate that works well as is, and probably works better than anything that I could mock-up in terms of its close fit to all the undercarriage components. Had I tried to do a custom one, I think I would have wound up losing a bit of clearance. So it's well worth keeping this one. It's quite strong enough. You can see some of the lift components there, which we'll go over later. Customer chose some old school round off-road lights, which I approve of. I think that's kind of a cooler way to go than the new LED style on a vehicle like this. It's got the round headlights. It kind of has an old school look to it, so I think that's pretty slick. We had the mounts for the high lift jack powder coated as well, so they've been sandblasted and powder coated to match everything else. And we've added a locking handle on there, as you can see. So that way it's a little bit theft resistant. I always try to make my stuff absolutely rattle free, but when we start adding components like these, extremely difficult to keep everything completely rattle free, because of course the mechanism on this jack can rattle around. But you know, it's nothing to do with the parts that I've made. You know, it's just the nature of having a jack on the front of the vehicle, or anywhere on your vehicle. Well, this little Mitsubishi Pajero Mini has undergone quite the transformation. From all the components that I fabricated, to the lift kit, to the wheels and tires, to the paint job that the customer has given it, to some of the lighting that's gone in, electrical inside. This thing has really changed, and it's become quite the little off-roader. I'd love to see some more power added to it. Let's hope that happens in the future. But in the meantime, we'll have a look over all of those components that I made. We'll have a look at that lift kit. We'll look at the wheels and tires, and we'll get the customer's reactions on this build. And that brings another episode to a close. Thanks so much for joining me here at Balmer's Workshop. To support the channel, please subscribe. Thank you so much for your comments and for your likes. Please stay tuned to check out all of the components that are still coming up for this vehicle. As you can see on screen now, we'll be doing a rear bumper with swing out tire carrier, some really killer custom rock sliders, a traction board mount, and much more. See you next time.